Welcome him this morning.
All right. Good morning. Can you guys hear me? I think my mic's working all right. Yeah. Okay. Maybe not because no one's saying anything. So I need feedback. Sometimes, when you're preaching, you just don't know. Maybe people are sleeping. I wouldn't want to make you guys fall asleep. So thank you guys so much for being here. As you said, my name is Pastor Stephen. I have the privilege of serving here as our community life pastor. And we're going to talk about such a fun subject today called rejection. Yeah, we're talking about rejection. It's going to be so fun, you guys. So don't answer this out loud. Don't raise your hand. Maybe if you want to whisper to the person next to you. What's a time that you felt rejected? Maybe for you, it was you were in the friend zone, whatever that may have looked like for you. Maybe there was a job or a promotion you thought you were going to get, and you didn't get it, and you're kind of like, wait, what's going on here? Maybe there was a dream school you had in mind that you didn't get into or something like that. Well, I wanted to start off with a story that maybe will make you guys laugh a little bit, because at times it made me laugh. But I remember having to learn a lot through rejection when I was in college. And I was dating this girl when I went to Azusa Pacific. And things were going well. We dated a couple months, and just kind of your typical cheesy Christian college relationship. Two people looking for their ring by spring, and so if you don't know the term, just Google it. And we're dating, and things are going well, and at least so I thought. And she kind of, at least from my perspective, blindsided me one day and breaks up with me, and I didn't take the rejection well. And I was like, what? Why would you break up with me? Like, what's wrong with me and all this stuff? And, I kept just kind of pressing her. I was like, look, I need to talk. I need to just ask some things. I need some clarification, which wasn't a great sign of maturity in me at the time. And, she didn't have to do that, but, actually met with me and still said she wanted to be friends. And so I had this sort of idea, and I think some of us can have this idea as well, whether it's, in dating relationships or, with work or school or whatever it was, that if you check off all the right boxes, that people are going to like you and are going to, want you around and all this stuff. And I remember I kept thinking, okay, well, if I'm, good looking, if I, am a strong Christian, if I'm smart, if I'm funny, if I'm all these things, then she's going to want to stay with me, or girls are going to want to date me, or whatever. And so when she broke up with me, I was really mad, and I just kept saying, well, what's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? Did I make you mad? Did we have some kind of big fight or something? And she basically said, no, you didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing inherently wrong with you. And she even said this, I still like you. I just don't see you as my husband someday. You're not the man of my dreams. There's nothing, and she kept on repeat, there's nothing wrong with you. It's not that there's some huge flaw in you. It's just that I don't see us as a great fit. I don't see us as a great match in the future, and, being husband and wife and raising kids and all this stuff. And it was really hard for me to get it to sink in. It wasn't until later that I truly realized how profound that was, that she actually did like me, that she thought I was a great person and a godly man, just like many other people did, but she didn't want to be in a relationship with me. And I just really struggled with that, and I was like, I don't get it. Why don't you want to be with me? And sometimes we can confuse rejection, or we can take it very personally, like, what's wrong with me then? And we often don't think, well, maybe it's just the role. You see, I wasn't rejected personally as a person. Myself, my identity wasn't what was being rejected. It wasn't because I hadn't checked off all the right boxes. It was because I just wasn't in the right role. It wasn't the right fit for me. And so often, the problem with rejection isn't so much that we get rejected in life, but it's often how we handle rejection. And this is one of the main issues that we've been studying in the life of Saul in our series on becoming the villain. And often one of the ways we can become the villain isn't so much that we haven't checked off all the right boxes. It's that when we face rejection or when we face a tough time, it's that we don't always handle it well. We don't always handle it with grace and things like that. And so it's not necessarily Saul's identity that's rejected by God. It's not like God saying, I don't like you, you're a terrible person, I hate you, or whatever. God's saying, look, I'm rejecting you as king. You're not fit to be king over my people. And so you might just be thinking, okay, well, that's it, right? He's just no longer king. La-di-da, isn't that great? But for Saul, it's pretty hard. It's kind of hard to be anything else once you've been king. And most of us could probably think, yeah, it'd be kind of hard to take a pay cut It'd be pretty weird if you got fired from your job to have to go back to some other company at a lower level. That'd be really weird. Or maybe if you were at a 4-year college and somehow you had to go to a junior college, it would feel strange to have to go back down. So for Saul, he doesn't take his rejection as king well. And basically, he just kind of digs himself into deeper and deeper holes throughout the scriptures. And we're going to kind of come to a head in 1 Samuel chapter 28, if you guys want to turn there in your Bibles. That's where we'll be reading today. And to give you guys sort of an update, Saul has been rejected as king, and we'll see why in this passage, actually, and that David has become crowned the new king, or at least anointed the new king, but Saul has been, rejecting him and sort of resisting him as king. And he's sort of on this Make Israel Great Again campaign to fight with the Philistines and make war against them, and it's not working great. And he's backed into a corner, his army's losing, and it's sort of looking like this is it. This is the end of the road. He's in a corner. He doesn't know what to do. And before, if you guys were here before in our series, Saul would usually cry out to Samuel, the prophet. And Samuel, would generally help him. Or often, he was partnered with Samuel, and that's how he won many of his military victories. But he doesn't have Samuel. He doesn't have David. And as we'll see, he's having trouble connecting with God here. And so we begin in 1 Samuel chapter 28, verse 3. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in his own town of Ramah. Saul had expelled the Mediums and Spiritists from the land. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he was afraid. Terror filled his heart. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him by dreams or Urim or prophets. Saul then said to his attendants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, so I may go inquire of her." Later on, he meets the woman. The woman said, "I see a ghostly figure coming up out of the earth." "What does he look like?" Saul asked. "An old man wearing a robe is coming up," she said. Then Saul knew it was Samuel, and he bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" "I'm in great distress," Saul said. "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has departed from me. He no longer answers me, either by prophets or by dreams. So I have called on you to tell me what to do." Samuel said, "Why do you consult me now that the Lord has departed from you and has become your enemy? The Lord has done what he predicted through me. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and has given it to one of your neighbors, to David. Because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites, the Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will deliver both the Israelites and you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines." Immediately Saul fell full length on the ground, filled with fear because of Samuel's words. His strength was gone, for he had eaten nothing all that day and all that night. So this is a bit of a difficult passage for many of us, and even a difficult one it was for me to digest, and there's so many different things here and there. In fact, as I was looking this up, often what I'll do with a text is I'll try to see how it's been preached historically in the church. And what I found is that it hasn't really been preached historically in the church. If you guys are familiar with maybe the Roman Catholic Church, some older school Presbyterian church, United Methodist, all those, they have what's called the lectionary, and every 3 years, they go through all the same text. So they might have, such and such Bible passage paired with these, and they'll have a different theme. And so I was looking up to see, okay, well, 1 Samuel 15 is paired with these ones. 1 Samuel such and such is paired with these. And they literally don't read, like throughout church history, most churches have not read this passage in church and preached on it. And so here we are today. Maybe we're the first. Who knows? Probably not. There's probably some other pastor somewhere who's done this. But we can see why, because this is a very difficult text. There's a lot of things going on, and we can't get to all of them today, but it really shows us a lot about how we handle rejection and how God sees rejection, and he even experiences that as well. So there's a couple different questions we're going to be asking. And one of the first things that came up for me as I was reading this was, why doesn't God answer Saul? That's a bit of a weird thing that happens. I mean, I get, Saul has a lot of different issues that we've talked about throughout the series, but he's sort of seeking, he's asking God in like 3 different ways. And in his mind, I'm not saying he's right, but, where else is he supposed to go? What else is he supposed to turn to when he's tried 3 times to meet with God? Now, I don't really think you should go to tarot cards or to a Ouija board or something like that, even though for us, we don't see that as a big deal. And that's the second part is, what's the big deal here? Because what happens later on is because of this almost becomes the final nail in Saul's coffin, that he's just been digging himself deeper and deeper and deeper. And he does this, And actually a few chapters later, which is actually the next day, Samuel's words come to pass, and he dies. He's overrun by the Philistines, and he ends up not wanting to get captured or tortured by them, and so he ends up committing suicide. And so I kept thinking, but why? Why is this such a big deal? Or was he really too far gone? But as we read in the scriptures, we see that this is actually a big deal to God. While it might not seem like a very big deal to us, we see in the book of Leviticus, it says, I will set my face against anyone who turns to mediums and spiritists to prostitute themselves by following them. And so this is a big deal to God, and this is something we see here. But at the same time, there's some other issues. Even if we're like, okay, you know what, that wasn't the right thing to do. He disobeyed a direct order from the scriptures and things like that, and he was already digging himself deeper and deeper. But we talk about, well, why did God reject him in the first place as king? What's this rejection that he's not taking so on? We see in 1 Samuel 28 that it says this. Samuel says to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands because you did not obey the Lord and carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites. And many of us might not be that familiar with it. Essentially what had happened in 1 Samuel chapter 15 was that he was tasked with going to war against the Amalekites. And for us, it seems a little bit odd, and we don't really quite have the same understanding of war as they did then. And often war was just one king didn't like another king, or there was some political or economic reason, and they would go to war, and usually they would kill all the men, they'd take the women and children as slaves, and then they would take all the cattle, all the sheep, any livestock, and then take all the crops for themselves. And sometimes if you just had a year of famine, you just went to war against another nation. But what's interesting here, and the way, and I'm not necessarily saying that this is the way it should be done now, but this is at least the way they understood that God did things back then, that when you went to war, especially when God told you to do it, that it wasn't for those reasons. That they saw themselves as these sort of divine agents of God's judgment or his justice in the world. And so when he carried out the sentence against the Amalekites, you did it. And he said, basically, you're not going to war for your own benefit. You're going as an agent of my justice, as really God's vessel in a way that they thought of it back then. And so what Saul did was, he said, okay, I'll do that. And he destroyed their army and all that, but he takes their king captive, almost like a trophy, and then he takes all their cattle, all their sheep, and crops. And Samuel just goes to him, what are you doing? I just told you you're not supposed to do that God wants you to do it this way, and this is the way you understand it in the covenant you made with God, and you directly disobeyed it. And once again, for us, this might not seem like a big deal, but to God, this is a huge rejection of his words. And I know this is a difficult thing to wrestle with and to grapple with. And so Saul grabs Samuel's robe as he's walking away and tears the robe from him. And that's why it says the Lord has torn the kingdom. Samuel says to him, in the same way the Lord will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to someone else because you did not obey the Lord and carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites. And so even then, though, I go, yeah, but Saul is still, he's almost doing the right thing. He's almost there. He's kind of trying. And what about how, even if he did all that, it seems like he's maybe trying to do the right thing here. Isn't he trying to at least, inquire of the Lord or something like that? Because as I read this, I thought, well, doesn't God want to answer our prayers? Doesn't he want a relationship with us and to speak with us and things like that? And so, as you guys might have seen, if you have in your Bibles, it says in English, for most of our translations, that that Saul inquired of God. And what's really interesting there is there's two words in the Hebrew that are usually used for inquire or to seek or to search out. And the first one is called darash. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. My Hebrew is horrendous. But I know how to study it. I don't really know how to pronounce it very well. And it's basically this idea of seeking or searching. You're chasing after someone. It's usually used of David, especially in the Psalms, that he wants to seek God, that he really is just longing for his presence. That some of you might be familiar with the psalm that talks about as the deer pants for streams of living water, that you're just hungry and thirsty for God. That's this idea of darash. But there's another one that gets used of Saul often, and it's sha'al, which is to ask or to borrow. And so when this passage in 1 Chronicles later on talks about Saul, it says, he did not inquire of the Lord. And I went, hold up. Yeah, he did. And then I did the Hebrew work, and I was like, oh, wait, no, he didn't. And so essentially here, the word that's used in 1 Samuel is sha'al, that he was almost trying to borrow from God, that he was backed into a corner, and he just said, okay, God, I need your help. He'd almost put God in a box and had forgotten about him and said, oh yeah, I can go in this box and get some help, can't I? Whereas he wasn't truly seeking the Lord daily. He wasn't cultivating a relationship with him. And that's why it says he did not darash. He did not inquire and earnestly seek the Lord. It reminds me of a friend of mine who had a birthday party a few years ago out in MDR, Marina Del Rey, or Marina Del Ra, as many Californians would say. And he rented a Duffy boat, and we had a ton of people on there. It was probably 12 to 14 of us. And a lot of them, we didn't really know a lot of his other friends. But they were all from his hometown or his home state. Maybe they went to college with him. And they were all sort of this tight-knit group of friends. Now, one of the things you got to know about my friend, we'll just call him Bob. Bob had a really difficult problem with social anxiety. And so for him, anytime we go out to a bar to get, a glass of milk, anytime we went out to a bar, and, I was, judging all the sinners and doing prayer walks around it. I'm just kidding, I didn't really do that. Didn't do that. Maybe there's someone who's like, a pastor at a bar? You don't say. So I was hanging out with all these heathens, and anytime we would go to a bar, he would be so anxious, and he would really have to give himself like these pep talks in a mirror, and just really, it was so difficult for him because he really, I think in a sense, I can't totally say this about him, but I think maybe feared a little bit of that rejection. It was very difficult for him to go to a party or to throw a party or to do these kinds of things. So this was a big step for him, and we were so excited for him, and it was a total success, and he's driving the Duffy boat around the marina, and we're all having a good time, and he's wearing a captain's hat, and we're just having a great time. And all these friends, seem to be having a good time. And then about a week or two later, I find out that he's just really struggling again. Because those same friends, those like 12-ish people that he'd known for a long time, were kind of from his hometown, that they all went out a couple of times, whether it was a bar, a party, or whatever, and all those people went without him and didn't even bother to invite him and posted it all over social media. And I could see that he was crushed, that he made this huge effort and went out of his way and paid for this Duffy boat. And yeah, we chipped in and stuff, but he went out of his way and made a big step for him, and he felt rejected. That these people had sort of this sha'al relationship with him, that they were almost like those moocher friends that you never really see until they need something from you or until you can give something to them. And I wonder if that's what God felt like with Saul. Where God's doing all these things for Saul, where he's made him king and he's given him these blessings in his life, and yet Saul continually disobeys him, but only wants God when he can get something from God. And I wonder if that's how God felt, because that's rejection right there. That as Saul rejected the Lord, so he was rejected, not as himself, not in his identity, but as king. And often he confused his identity as king with his role. Some of you may know that one of my favorite shows of all time is Mad Men. So I don't know if we have any Mad Men fans in the house. But if not, it's no big deal. It's also one of my inspiration and the reasons I love Suits. And one of the central characters in the series, he should be up there. I don't know why he's like underwater. His name is Don Draper. And he's the guy who made it. Imagine, maybe all, your parents' hopes and dreams for you to be successful in the business world or as a doctor, as a lawyer, or whatever. He is the top guy at this advertising agency. He's won awards. He's created all these successful advertising campaigns. And as you see in the show, many of these people, they get to the top, they get to the pinnacle, and they find it's kind of empty. But it seems like they have everything. They got the looks, they got the money, they got the status, the respect. Even as it seems on the surface, it seems like they have great family lives, but it leaves them kind of empty. And so this guy, Don, goes to a spiritual retreat center, and he comes across this guy named Leonard. And he should be on the next slide. And we'll see from what he says that he's the exact opposite of these guys, that he's just sort of your average pencil pusher, kind of a forgettable guy at your company where no one really knows his name. And he really struggles with depression. And he says something so profound, and I hope that we can catch on to it today, because I think we all feel this in some way, shape, or form. And I think in some ways God longs for us to see that we do this to him as well. He says this: I had a dream. I was on a shelf in the refrigerator. Someone closes the door, and the light goes off. I know everyone's out there eating. And then they open the door, and you see them smiling. And they're happy to see you, but maybe they don't look right at you. And maybe they don't pick you. And then the door closes again, and the light goes off. And that's it. That's all he says. And then the main character, Don, he just runs over to him and gives him this huge hug of affirmation. Because even though he has it all, even though he's checked off all the boxes in the advertising world and his family life, he feels that at times that he just longs for people to accept him and give him the love that he's longing to get. And yet sometimes, even though we want to give someone love, we just don't quite know how to give it in a way that they'll receive it. Or even though we want to receive love, we don't even know what it looks like, and he just gives them this big hug to empathize with him. And often we do that to God, that like his fridge analogy, that we've put God in a box. And, when we need something, we go to that box, and we say, oh, hey, there's God. And maybe we choose something else, and we close the door, and God's longing for us to take him out of the box, to be front and center in our lives. Or maybe for you, you've been like my friend, who had the bow and MDR, that those friends keep him in a box. They're like, oh, hey, it's great to see you. I'm so glad you're here. But they don't always pick him, and they don't always invite him. And I think this is how Saul feels, especially when it comes to David. Because when you think about it, David is kind of like those advertising guys, that everything he does succeeds, that every battle he fights, he seems to win. Everyone wants to follow him as a military leader, and when he wins battles, when he kills Goliath, everyone says Saul kills his thousands. Saul's a good military leader, but David kills his tens of thousands, and they brag about him. They're like, he's so great, and they might not be trying to reject Saul, but he feels that way. He feels it deep down inside that he's in the fridge, that people love David more, and he doesn't know how to receive this love. He doesn't know how to be anything other than a king to receive love and acceptance. And so as I hear that, I feel for Saul. Even when I saw that episode, I kept rewinding it because I was like, this scene describes what I know I felt in my life and what I know we all felt, and maybe what God is longing to even say to us through a TV show on AMC. And so as I see Saul struggling with this rejection, even though it's big in some ways, where God is saying you're not fit to be king, but even where some people say, hey, Saul, you're all right, but David's the man. What's he supposed to do? How is he supposed to deal with this? And that's the big question that gets to me, whether it's in this chapter where he goes to a medium, or whether he's getting rejected. What's he supposed to do after he's rejected as king? I couldn't really figure it out for a long time. And then I started reading about Saul's son, Jonathan, because I realized, and this is the key here, that Jonathan, when Saul is rejected as king, Jonathan is also rejected as the prince. Jonathan is his son. He's the heir to the throne. And when David is anointed king, essentially, Jonathan also gets pushed to the outskirts. It's not that there's necessarily anything wrong with him. It's just that now he's been rejected in his role as prince. And yet that didn't stop him from living out God's purpose for his life. It didn't stop him from being the friend that David needed. In fact, the scripture says in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 18, it says that after David had killed Goliath, and this is right around the time they sing those songs, that the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David. That when he knows that he's no longer the crown prince anymore, that David is the rightful king, when he's rejected in his role, his soul is bound to David. They become best friends. And we see that he makes a covenant with him. He actually gives him his robe, and he gives him his sword and his bow, and a very fine robe or tunic, giving it to him, saying, you are the prince. Here's a prince's sword for you because you are the rightful king, and I'm your friend. And he knew that was his purpose, and that's what he was supposed to do. And yet Saul was angry, and it displeased him. And he kept a close eye on David, because he didn't like him, because he didn't like being rejected, because when someone else was getting the accolades and the love and the acceptance that Saul longed for, it was very difficult for him to take it well. And so when we talk about what are we supposed to do when we get rejected, what are you supposed to do when you get friend zoned? Or, which by the way, this is free. The friend zone doesn't really exist, by the way. No one owes you being their friend. No one owes you being their girlfriend or boyfriend, because if you're like, that's so messed up that they friend zoned me, you actually girlfriend zoned or boyfriend zoned them. You only want to see them as that, and that's okay. But they can't just want to see you as a friend. So rant over. That one was free. You're welcome. Um, so ultimately, in accepting, maybe what seems like rejection to us, often we can see it as a new opportunity, as Jonathan did, and as ultimately as Christ did, because Christ is the ultimate exemplar of this. That he had all the glory, all the riches, all the greatness that heaven is, and yet he gave it all up for us. He took that robe of majesty, whatever he might have worn in heaven, and traded it for the rough-spun robes of a little carpenter's boy. And he gave up all the things of heaven for us, and he got rejected. And he was killed and crucified. And maybe that wasn't necessarily literally us, but I'm sure he feels the same way when we put him in the box, when we put him in the fridge, and we select something else other than Christ. And he longs for us to have him as front and center of our lives, and to do that for others, and to help accept others, and help others in their rejection, and even in our own rejection. Because he set aside all the glory he experienced in heaven to live a lowly life on the earth, knowing he'd be rejected, knowing he'd be brutally killed by us. But he did it so that we might be accepted by God the Father. One more story of rejection, and I've shared parts of this, and I know my life group has heard about it, and it's been difficult for me in the past to share before, but some of you know that being in my role as the community life pastor wasn't my dream job when I was 22 years old when I first graduated college. And I had no clue where God was going to take me, or that he was, well, actually I did have a clue, but it was the wrong clue. I thought I was going to be the youth pastor at my home church in Silicon Valley that I'd been at since I became a Christian, and I, did everything. I was the children's intern, and I was there were days I did VBS, and then I went and spoke at the junior high group, and then I helped pack a truck for the high school camp. I did everything at this church, and I love these kids to death. And even two of my old youth group kids are going to be in my wedding as groomsmen. And I still go and see them from time to time, those who go to college around here. And I loved these kids so much back then, and even still now. And I wanted to be their youth pastor. And right before I graduated, I got a phone call that the high school pastor, the current one, who was my old boss and mentor, was stepping down. And everyone, was just kind of going to chaos because no one knew what to do. The other intern, was kind of like, I don't want to be high school pastor, but they kind of pushed him into it a little bit. And things were just kind of chaotic. Even they would call me asking for help. And I would try to do what I could, even though I was living far away. And long story short, I had talked to the associate pastor and the executive pastor. I was like, look, I love these kids. I love this church. I want to help out. And I'll pay you to be here. Like, I'll do whatever it takes. And I had a job lined up at a summer camp. And I wasn't going to be done till August of that year. This was probably like February or March. I was talking to them. And they said, you know what? We're probably not even going to hire someone with the way the budget is and all this stuff until August. Yeah, we would love for you to have you here this summer. But man, go do what God's calling you to do at the camp. And we'll have you back here in August. And, whether we have you as high school pastor or whether, someone else, we'll help you find something here or somewhere else. And I remember I felt such peace about that. That's what I thought was like, I was ready to, give the rest of my life to that church and, be the senior pastor someday and, be there till I was like 80 or 90 years old or however long God would have me. And I remember I received the news shortly before I came back from camp. I hadn't heard a lot from those two pastors, and I found out that they left the church over the summer and that the new guys who came weren't going to honor that agreement that we had. And I was crushed. I mean, I would just spend days. I would get my guitar and I'd go out on the dock by the lake and I would just, play the same worship song over and over and over again and just cry out to God and go, God, why is this happening? I should have never come here. I should have never done this and all this stuff. And I hated that new high school pastor. I was so mean to him. I was not a good person to him and, opposed him and all this stuff. And he was much more gracious to me than I was to him because I was the Saul. I felt rejected. I felt like I was in the fridge. And that, they said, oh, isn't it nice to have you at our church? We're going to grab that guy. And glad we can laugh about it now because I struggled with it so much that time. And I remember we had to have all these conversations because I wanted to still serve, but under him. And I remember saying to him, and this is like a mean, bitter thing, was I said, someday you're going to leave here in, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, however long, but you know what? I would have stayed here the rest of my life. And you don't really care about these kids. And yeah, I was mean. I was like, Mean Guys, the movie, if there was such a thing. And eventually, I sunk into like depression for like a year, and I was just unemployed and was interviewing at all these churches. And finally, I ended up down in Southern California, which led to a few other things, which led to me being here. And recently, so that was probably like 4 or 5 years ago, and I got like a couple text messages and phone calls recently that guy left the church and that he's going to Indianapolis, or he's already there, to be an associate pastor at this huge mega church, and good for him and all that stuff. And I was happy for him. I actually was glad, and God healed me in that way where I was happy for him, that I didn't feel rejected by that church anymore because I'd moved on and because I accepted that, God, you're not mad at me. Maybe even that church, it's not necessarily they don't like me, even though they kind of had some reason to after that, but you had a different role for me. And it was really hard for me not to be, like, I was like the king of that church. Like, I knew everybody. And I thought, I felt rejected because none of them stood up. Well, maybe not none of them, but a lot of them didn't stand up for me. And yet, when I finally accepted the new law graciously that God had for me, I ended up here and life is going pretty good, but it wasn't until I learned how to take rejection well. And not just that, but to be happy for other people. Because sometimes it might not even be, it might just be some of my friends from college, have something awesome happen to them, and I go, why isn't anything awesome happening to me? What about me? Am I not good enough? Did I not check the boxes? And many of us, maybe you struggle with that. Maybe you're just longing to be accepted or to stop being so rejected, but maybe God has a different role for you. Maybe God has something in store. And I know it's so hard because I remember hearing those things and I'd be like, yeah, but I don't see it. But it's there, I think, I hope, and God has something else for you even in rejection. And we can have hope today that God is still there with us if we just seek him earnestly, if we long for him to be in close relationship with us and be the center of our lives and not in some box. And so we must be ready and willing to face rejection gracefully. And we should strive to accept the consequences of our actions, whether they seem right to us or not. And we must be ready for someone else to be valedictorian or to get the internship or the promotion or the pay raise, even if we don't, because it's not a rejection of our very self. But it's often a rejection of the self we hide behind. Because when someone gets what we think we deserve, it's not a rejection of ourselves, it's rejection of the self we hide behind. And so may we not just be like Jonathan by being happy when someone gets what we might think we deserve, but may we imitate Christ and continually give up our power, privilege, and resources for the benefit of the kingdom. The worship team's going to come up in a bit, or right now. And during this time of worship, maybe some of you feel it. You're like, I've been rejected, or I'm being rejected, or maybe there's just still that bitterness in your heart, because for years, there'd be worship sessions like this, and I'd be over in the corner in a fetal position, or I'd be crying, and I'm just going, God, what am I supposed to do? Why don't you care? Why have you rejected me? Maybe you feel like you're in the box, that you're in the fridge, and that you're just longing for God, or you're longing for someone to pick you. Or maybe you're just having trouble with rejection. And I just want to encourage us in this time of worship that we would say, God, make me a vessel. God, whatever you would have, I want to be ready and willing to take it and accept it joyously and be happy for others and be happy for the lot you're giving me in life, no matter what it is. And so whatever that might be, or maybe there's people in your life, maybe you realize, because I realized in writing this message that sometimes I'm like those people on the Duffy boat, that I'm rejecting people, maybe even just in small, subtle ways, that maybe I'm just not inviting them, or I'm not thinking about them, or I'm not repaying them in certain ways, and just to think, who can I accept? Who might be feeling rejected by me or by society, who I can show the love and acceptance of God? So may those things be on our hearts and mind. May we bring those things to the Lord, and if you guys need prayer, we'll have prayer ministers on the sides, and just bring those things to the Lord today as we worship.
please rise? In the crushing, in the pressing, you are making a new wine. In the soil I now surrender, you are breaking new ground. So I yield to you and to your careful hand. When I trust you, I don't need to understand. So make me your vessel, make me an offering, make me whatever you want me to be. God, I came here with nothing but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me.
Some people have kind of asked what this song's about. God's always doing a new work, and He's making new wine. And one of the things I wanted to share is some of us may not know how wine's made, but there's a very ancient practice of crushing grapes, and still one of the modern ways to do that is by people stepping into the grapes, because the feet are gentle enough where they won't crush them, or they will crush them, but they'll produce wine or grapes that's going to come out. But what happens is when you have a machine that presses on the grapes too hard, it begins to crush the seed, which gives a bitter taste to the wine. Some of us at times in our lives, Stephen was talking about rejection from people, or maybe a boss or a position, but a lot of us go through the rejection of we're just not seeing something happen in our lives that we really want to happen. And I think one of the lessons was we can be too results focused, right? Like, I want to get that promotion, or I want to see this startup take off, or I want to see this happen, and it's just not happening right now. And for whatever reason, it can feel like God is blocking us, or it can feel like something in the world is blocking us. And this message is really about, how do I let these things in my life that feel like they could crush me, not crush me, not produce a bitterness in my wine? Because God isn't just about the results, He's about producing new wine in our lives. That as we feel like we're getting crushed by the world, I think we can allow it to be the gentle feet that begin to produce new wine, or we can allow it to be the machinery that begins to crush the seeds in our lives to produce bitterness in our lives. That's what this series is about. God wants to make us new. He wants to produce new wine that even in the crushing, there's this sweet, wonderful, beautiful wine that can take place. But that's a choice. That's a choice of submitting our hearts to God, or we can let the bitterness, we can let the seeds of our hearts get crushed and produce bitterness. So as we respond this morning, maybe there's something in your life where it's just not going the way you had hoped. Something's not working out for you. And, the change isn't that your situation necessarily would change. Saul's situation wasn't going to change, but his response could change. That our response could change, that our hearts could change, that we would respond with maturity, and that God would produce that new wine in us to be a blessing wherever we are. One powerful way we do this is we go to God in worship, but we also go to God in prayer. And so we want to make our prayer ministers available to you. If you are a prayer minister, we'd love for you to go to both sides. And for the next moment as we respond in worship, asking God to produce new wine in us, I want to invite you to get prayer. There's power in prayer, and there's power in the partnership of people praying for us. Let's respond together.
In the crushing, in the pressing, you are making new wine. the soul I now surrender. You are breaking new ground. Let's sing that one more time. In the crushing, in the pressing, you are making new wine. In the soil I now surrender. You are breaking new ground. You are breaking new ground. Make me your vessel. Make me an offering. Make me whatever you want me to be. God, I came here with nothing but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. So make me your vessel. So make me your vessel. Make me an offering. Make me whatever you want me to be. God, I came here with nothing but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. 'Cause where there is new wine, there is new power, there is new freedom, and the kingdom is here. I lay down my old flames to carry your new fire today. 'Cause where there is new wine, there is new power, there is new freedom, and the kingdom is here. I lay down my old flames to carry your new fire today. Let's sing that. I lay down my old flames. I lay down my old